Item number 16.
Item number 16 is an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the city's involvement in VIA's 5-year streetcar and transit improvement plan, specifically removal of the condition of establishing a special assessment district and the contribution of $15 million in private sector funds, and replacing the funding with other non-City of San Antonio funds. Removal of the condition to develop and approve a tri-party interlocal agreement with all partnering funding entities, and replacing the tri-party arrangement with 2 interlocal agreements, one between the City of San Antonio and VIA, and one between Bexar County and VIA. And 3, clarification of the county's $55 million contribution.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Mayor and City Council, we're recommending an amendment to the VIA's Transit Improvement Plan city package. The reason for that is the conditions have changed over the past year since October of 2011 when it was approved by Council. At that time, Council approved a $55 million package to support VIA's Transit Improvement Plan. That included the streetcar program, Westside Multimodal Center, the Robert Thompson Center, improvements to the downtown bus stops and upgrades to those, the bus circulator, and also park and rides at 281 and Brooks City Base area. Leading up to that action, VIA asked the city to match the county's contribution of $55 million. So city management and staff looked at how to come up with that 55, and we're successful in identifying 40 of the 55 with city funds, $32 million in funding, and then $8 million, which was allocated to South Alamo for reconstruction, in-kind service for us, reconstructing that corridor in preparation for a streetcar. So that was a total of 40. So that at that time, that left us with a $15 million gap. The only source that we could really identify at that time was a private special assessment of the downtown property owners. So what has changed? In the past year, that funding gap has more than disappeared, thanks to other funding partners, the federal government and the county increasing their contribution from 55 to 92 million. That $15 million need disappeared. And, as we talked more with the downtown property owners, they currently have a special assessment in place that accumulates approximately $2 million a year coming from the private property owners downtown. That takes care of the downtown upkeep, the maintenance, power washing, trash collection, landscaping, and also the ambassador program down. So it was difficult to get them to say that they would have over 50% support, which is what's required for a special assessment district, to add to that assessment for those owners. So what we're recommending, given those changes, is that we drop the requirement for the $15 million in special assessment from the private sector property owners, and that would keep the city's contribution right at the $40 million, but not tie it to a private contribution. The second element is, at the time that this was being discussed and negotiated, we wanted to have a tri-party agreement between the county, the city, and VIA. We don't see the need for that now. Now that VIA's commitment has gone from 55 million, the county's commitment has gone from 55 to 92 million. That's in place. They have a signed agreement with VIA, so we could execute a funding agreement like we typically would, a two-party agreement with VIA on this. So that's staff is recommending approval of this item.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Just a couple of questions to follow up. So I want to clarify, what you're saying is that the city's contribution is staying the same. Is that right?
That's correct. It's still the $40 million.
Yeah, so we're not.
Right.
We're not. You're not asking us to allocate more resources from the city of San Antonio.
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned other sources. If you could just review, is that mostly the county?
It is mostly the county. They've increased their contribution to VIA's plan from 55 million to 92 million. So significant increase. There has been some federal involvement as well, Tiger Grant and so forth. continued support from the federal government as well.
Okay. Was that for the West Side Multimodal
Yes.
Center?
Yeah.
And you also mentioned the Public Improvement District. Now, what we're doing here, as I understand it, makes this more flexible. It doesn't preclude that at some point in the future we would actually engage the business owners in the Public Improvement District, right?
That is correct, and I have had some discussions with Ben Brewer of the Downtown Alliance, and they're open for discussions, and it may be a special assessment, or it could be individual contributions from property owners. We have to realize that right now the routes are not fully established yet because they're going through the federal alternatives analysis. By spring or summer, those routes will be nailed down. We'll know exactly which property owners are affected.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. In other words, what we're doing today is creating more flexibility to get this project done. We're not precluding private sector investment. I do believe that private sector investment would be good for this project, and that we should pursue it, as you say, in some form or another, either through a public improvement district or through significant individual contributions from property owners that are going to benefit from one of these lines. But thank you very much. Before we go on, what we'll do is take the citizens that came to speak and then hear from the rest of the council. The first citizen is Bob Martin.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council. For the record, my name is Bob Martin. I'm the president of the Homeowner Taxpayer Association of Bexar County. We basically fight for those on the tax end of tax and spend, which is most of us. Boy, what a sugarcoating I just heard. Looks like the business community that you claim would benefit from streetcars says it's a bad deal, and now they don't want to cough up the money. Imagine that. I was here, oh gosh, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was when you took up streetcars and decided to vote to fund it. The Homeowner Taxpayer Association made the case then that we had an election in 2000. It was soundly defeated. They called it light rail then, streetcars today, distinction without a difference. But I can see now why the city and council, the county and VIA have gotten together, gone through contortions of every imaginable kind in order to avoid a vote. This is really bad, Mayor. We live in a democracy. Hopefully the council will remember that. If you want to do rail, put it up for election. Obviously, your greatest fear is voter interference, which might come through the election process. Don't fear democracy, please. We went down to the grand opening of the new Primo bus service. That's the super bus that's going to be serving UTSA Medical Center in downtown. For the price of 1 mile of track, for a streetcar, you can buy approximately 40 Primo buses. I understand they're about $875,000 each. They run on natural gas. They don't pollute near as much as diesel or gas. And you don't need new infrastructure to run them. They can go on any city street, really. They're built to where they can make turns around tight corners. Just a reminder, we had streetcars in San Antonio up until 1933. At that time, they were deemed obsolete. They still are today, although you will call them modern streetcars. They still run on overhead wires and electricity and use electric motors. But they were replaced by buses because buses proved to be more cost effective and, of course, could make use of the existing infrastructure. So that's about it. Hopefully, Council will reconsider this issue and vote against this, or as a minimum, put it on the ballot. Let citizens vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. The business community doesn't like this. The citizens don't like it. We need to put it to a vote of all the people. And I'd like to give the remainder of my time to Bob Martin. Thank you.
I didn't quite have time to mention, I certainly look forward to you members of City Council that are going to be running for re-election. I hope you say with pride to your constituents that, hey, I voted for streetcars. Yeah, I'd like to hear that. Yeah, I voted for streetcars. No one else was for it. Even the business community wouldn't contribute anything to it, but I like it. So I look forward to hearing that. Elections is in May, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Ben Brewer.
Thank you. I'm Ben Brewer, president of Downtown Alliance and also president of Centro San Antonio, the Downtown Public Improvement District. And I'm here to speak in support of the amendment before you today. Downtown Alliance and our membership has long been supporters of this type of modality as an alternative means of moving folks in the center city. We don't see this project as the end all. We anticipate that this system will be expanded further north, south, east, and west. There will be opportunities for private sector involvement through sponsorships, and once the alignments are known for these routes, there'll be opportunities for property owners and other individuals to look at private contributions to help support this system. So I'd like to urge your support. This is an excellent initiative for the Center City and for San Antonio, and I want to reiterate that there is very strong private sector support for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Ed Cross.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Ed Cross. I am a property owner in downtown. Our firm has constructed 2 apartment projects there, the Vistana, which is on the near west side of downtown, and 1221 Broadway, which is on Broadway on the north side of town. Both of those existing projects are likely to be served by the streetcar. Both those projects have been a success. We are on both projects, we're 95% leased. I stand here to urge you to support this amendment. One of the things that we see is people are abandoning their cars, and they are moving downtown, and instead of having 2 cars to a family, they're having 1. And the streetcar is going to help that. The streetcar is going to help those folks make those decisions to get out of their cars, to get fewer cars on the roads, and to get around downtown easier. As a property owner, I am ready to write a check. I have raised my hands a number of times, waiting for the right vehicle, right structure for us to contribute. But as a property owner, as a business person, I am prepared to write a check to support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cross. Councilman Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, and I know I've been here too long now since I'm seeing things come back since I've been here. I'm not a big fan of rail. I think most people understand that. But I am a fan of the city working. And what I think we developed the first time was a compromise. Okay, I know that's not a real good term to use, but it was. And a compromise is a deal. And I'm not sure that anybody, until they do things today, really know how they're going to work out. So we worked out a compromise, and I have to thank the mayor for leading that compromise to get us the northeast, whatever you want to call it, route done first, because I think that was the route that had 2 things. One, the highest chance of working, and secondly, it levered the investments that we've already made there. If you go back and look at the Portland example, which everyone brings up, not only were the investments made contemporaneously with the investment in the rail, it was a quid pro quo. You build this, we build the rail. We also recognize that Portland put in incentives, and we've done a lot of that. So I think what the mayor led us to in the direction of doing the Northeast route the first time was absolutely the right thing to do. Second thing is, I think we've removed pretty much this, whether this is light rail or not, with the leadership of the county, because now they're not going to use ATD funds. I certainly want to compliment the judge for his leadership in that, because I think that was the right thing to do. We heard from a lot of people that there was some real concern about this, and I think that's been laid to rest. And the third thing is, we asked that VIA do the bus circulator on the east-west line and get that done. And we've seen that come to fruition. It's tagged on to the back of Primo. It's not exactly what I had envisioned, but nothing ever is. So, but it's there, and at least it gives us a chance to study the circulator concept, even though we still don't have any way to park on either end, but we will someday. And it is important to recognize that that does give us a chance. Now that brings us to the fourth point that I compromised on with many people, and that was the private support for this. And I would have to say that I don't think the conditions have changed, other than maybe we just recognized that something wasn't going to work, and we had to change. And that's saying that we're not paying any more money. Everyone that stood up here and talked about it is exactly right. The city's not committing any more money, and remember, $8 million of that is for fixing a street we probably need to fix anyway. But what became very important to me and became very obvious in all the examples I read is that if we didn't have in advance a commitment by the individuals in the geographic area that the investment was going to benefit, it really probably didn't have a real good chance of making. And then we all talk about this transit-oriented development. I would tell you that the development is following the incentives. And I am extremely pleased with what I see on Broadway. Okay, that is very good. And I will not take anything away from the people that have invested there. And I think that the leadership that the mayor has shown here in making those incentives was correct. And we've seen it work. But with a rail facility and us investing $40 million, and let's just take the 8 away and say we might need to do that anyway, the $32 million, if those are done, if that's spent into incentives or other ways, it might wind up being a better way to do it. But that's a discussion for another time. Today, we're asked to retrade a deal. We're asked to change something that and I will tell you, a lot of criticism, which doesn't bother me, I take it fine, I support it. And I support it because we had that public-private partnership with the local individuals. And it wasn't put in there just to fill a funding gap. I was here, I remember. It was put in there because I kept raising my hand and saying, where is the private money in this? Okay? So it's important to me, it's extremely important to me, that something that I think was extremely good in a compromise that keeps this city moving forward, that we stay with it. Because that's the thing about San Antonio. We compromise, we make decisions, and we go forward. I don't know if it's going to work or not. But I believe that we should stay with the original deal. And for that reason, I move to deny item 16, reconfirming and preserving City Ordinance 2011-10-20-0846 as originally passed by this council. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Thank you very much, Councilman Williams. Councilman Lopez.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Reed, you had me right to the end. Everything that you were saying, you were talking about as to what we've been discussing, how we've been discussing it, really hits the nail right on the head. In most part, by the SA 2020 debates that we had and discussions that we had for an extended period of time with an incredible number of people that ranked two things at the top of the tier of the focus of what we needed to be doing going forward, what we wanted to look like in the year 2020 and beyond, and that was addressing education and transportation. Those were clearly the top two issues. Well, I think we've addressed the issue, at least we've embarked on, of addressing a very strong component within the educational landscape with the pre-K initiative. The other debate that we've been having all along and trying to figure out how to go about addressing the issues of transportation, I think we've had, and I think, Reed, you did a good job of kind of bringing us along on the level of debate that we've had, the debate and argument, in many cases, what we've done relative to how we're going to address a streetcar. What we have here today, I think, is an example of what's expected of government, and that's to kind of work together, figure out ways of funding sources, and if it means leveraging federal dollars perhaps from one agency or another, that's what the county has done. We're fortunate that we've had that opportunity. In virtually every other transportation initiative that we had that we've been successful at, we've had multiple agencies leveraging their revenue sources and their capabilities to bring that to the table and make the program go forward. In today's environment, there is no way that any one entity, any one government entity can raise enough tax or have enough funding access available to them to fund anything in transportation. Recognizing that this is only one of the pieces of the multimodal approach that we need to be looking at from a long-term perspective for our city and for our city to continue to prosper the way we expect it to, I think this is clearly the direction we need to take. From a parliamentary procedural perspective, Mr. Mayor, I'm not really sure. I know that there's a motion. I didn't quite hear if there was a second. I'd like to make a motion, and there is a second, how we go about handling that, but I assume we need to
you'd make a motion for approval, and then we'll vote on Councilman Williams' motion first.
Okay, got it. So I'd like to make a motion for approval of the recommendation that was submitted by staff for the redesign of the language in the agreement.
All right, we have a motion and a second for approval. Councilman Souls.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little bit confused on the procedural. If we have a first motion to deny with a second, and then we've got a second motion to approve in a second, so I'm not bright enough to figure that one out. Somebody will have to do it for me. I voted against this proposal originally, and I intend to not support it again today. And if you go back to a year ago, mine was a rather narrow look at it, and it was I did not agree with the use of general funds or bond savings, and primarily because I believe that there are needs within the general fund that are greater than contribution to the streetcar, and that includes parks and libraries and streets and drainage and roads. I still feel that way today. It's interesting to note, and I'll give Councilman Williams credit for putting in the private contribution portion a year ago. I think that was a very important part, even though I did not support the overall initiative. But what I heard today was the reason that the private investment is going away is because there's no longer a need for it, that we found additional money. And I just want to caution that I don't recall many, looking at a lot of these projects across the country, many of them coming in at budget. They tend to come in greatly over budget. And so, that leads to the question of who is responsible for coming up with the incremental dollars if and when this comes in over budget. And having that private investment and having that $15 million, it shows buy-in from that community. It shows that they believe in the project. If by some chance we're lucky enough to come in under budget and we don't need that money, well, then it can be used for further development along those corridors that would continually enhance those projects, or we could rebate it back to those developers and business owners that paid it in. So I'm not sure that saying there's no longer a need is a good reason to eliminate it. And I certainly do understand the developments up along the corridors that are going to benefit, saying that they're happy to continue to support it, but I would like to see that in a more formal approach. This is a controversial issue. It has been for a long time. We go back to a vote in 2000. It's been debated for the last 2 years. I wish this had come to a public vote. I think it should come to a public vote. I think that we should trust the taxpayers and the voters, and if it's popular, it'll win. But unfortunately, it does not seem that there's an appetite to take this to the public, and that's something I wish was changed. But I will stand with my second to Councilman Williams' motion and see where it goes.
Thank you very much, Councilman Souls. Councilwoman Chan.
Thank you, Mayor. And just very quickly, a few questions of clarification. Mike, so I think I heard my council members, but also the private sector also sharing with this council in the city that this particular development will benefit the private sector. And that's your belief as a staff also, right?
Yes, it is expected with Streetcar, because of the permanent nature of the rail system, that you will have economic development happen around the stations and redevelopment occur in the areas.
And is this the staff recommendation for the council to approve in the staff's mind? This is a good position for the council to take?
Yes, we are recommending approval today.
Okay. So, and also I heard that the $15 million need went away because there are other sources found.
Yes, I do understand that there's more than a financial aspect to having private participation, and that's a good point. The financial need is not there because we did have a gap in putting together the funding between VIA and the city and the county at the time over a year ago. And again, there's been a significant increase in funding that has rendered these projects fully funded.
Okay. So one part that I've tried to understand is that so there's let's just say financially, because there are other philosophical issues and other than financial, but I just want to focus for a moment on financial part of it. So if there's a $15 million less, and private sector is willing to support and also to pitch in, what is the rationale behind the staff recommendation not to reduce from the $40 million commitment from the city, but reduce from the private sector? Can you explain to me what's the rationale behind the staff's recommendation?
Sure. On the private participation, there's two things with that. One is the city's $40 million is contingent under the current agreement on the 15 happening. Okay, so that means that VIA cannot access the city funds for quite some time, because the special assessment district would need to go through a full process after the alignments are defined, because we don't know who would be assessed at this point because the alignments aren't fully defined yet. So after they're defined in summer time frame, then we would go through that special assessment process and hope for a greater than 50% support, which is required. That's very doubtful to get more than 50%, but that would be what we would strive to do. So again, you're talking about it's a public process, there's a public hearing process. So summer for alignments, then an assessment process. You're looking at more than a year from now before VIA would even know if the city's commitment is legitimate, because our commitment is tied to the private.
So are you sharing with the council that at this point in time, the private sector or in that PID, more than 50% of people will not be in favor? So you don't have 51% to go forward with additional assessment to come up with the 15 million. Is that?
There.
Cheryl.
They didn't go through, and Ben, correct me, there was not an official petition and drive and people voting on it. But let's go back to a year ago, if I could just explain it this way. And Ben, please speak. So when we were first to talk about the east to north route, we had the conditions for the approval that included 15 million private sector investment. We went out and began the discussions with some of the property owners. Subsequent to your decision, VIA and the county announced that they had full funding for the east to west route. And so it created substantial confusion then for the downtown, those in the PID today, and our conversations about do we expand the PID, because those who were along the east-west route then began saying, why should I pay for the east to north? I've got my part of the east-west is funded through the total project budget. It really created a lot of confusion, and I think two things are important. One, and I'm not sure how or why the media have portrayed this as the business people are opposed to streetcar. I think it's the opposite. They're supportive. I think we haven't come up with then how do they financially participate. We even looked at zones where those closest to the route paid more than those a little bit farther away. It became very complicated, further complicated by the fact that VIA and the county came up with full funding through a variety of sources to cover the east and west. And so as we talked about it and explored what to do, the private sector even indicated that they would be willing to pay more in a PID for other capital improvements to enhance downtown, but that this needed to be handled by VIA, county, whoever else, not directly through the PID process. That was the feedback we received generally from the property owners, and they're shaking their head yes. And so we, at the same time, VIA wants to go forward. And before our 40 million could be released for their planning and their use, we needed to come back to City Council and then say, they will identify how that 15 million is funded. It's not that the budget was reduced, but rather they have other funds to cover that 15 million. So we're coming back just saying, please amend the agreement so that we aren't bound by our 40 million can't be released unless there's a PID, but rather they, as long as it's non-city funding, they will go forward with the project. This is describing it a little, but this is really what happened. You know, we did east to west, or east to north first. It was with our combination funding. It turns out now the county is actually doing more than the 55 million. That was a consideration. They had to at least match what we're doing. They're ending up doing more. So I think the total project budget now is a greater responsibility is VIA in the county and lesser for us. So instead of 55, our commitment is 40. And we're just saying, and it could be, there could be still some private investment. In fact, I think VIA, Jeff, thinks that there probably will be some private investment. They don't have it worked out yet as to what that will be or what shape that will come in or what form, but it doesn't rule it out. It's just saying, city, you don't have to do a PID under those conditions to go forward. They'll come up with non-city funding to make that work, and our commitment is limited to the 32 and the 8.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that explanation helps a little.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that clarification. So the city's money truly really always been 40 million because the money generated from PID is still private money. Okay, so let's just be clarified that our commitment in the past was not 55. It was 40 million all along because 15 million is supposed to come from PID. So what you're saying is that this is more of equity issue that discourage the private sector. But then the private sector is willing to do other improvements on the PID, but they don't want this to be associated with the streetcar itself. I think that's what I'm hearing. So And then the question then will be, and I heard across, thank you for your commitment that you're ready to write a check. So my question is, have we explored some sort of, and this is purely on financial part of it, but I guess I'm just don't understand why, if there's a reduction in funding, it seems to me that if we're talking about equity, shouldn't that also reduce our commitment too? Because at the end of the day, city's money come from taxpayers. It's not like we have $40 million. $40 million is from taxpayers' money. So, but I think I understood what we're saying, and thank you, Cheryl, for your clarification, and thank you, Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman Chan. Councilman Bernal.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Welcome, everybody, to District 1. Let me say a couple of things, and I like to do my very best to clarify some things. The idea that the business community against this is a fallacy, I'm not really quite sure where that came from. In fact, the business community is extremely excited about Streetcar, to the point that a county commissioner that voted against Streetcar is now starting a business on Broadway. That should demonstrate how much the business community is for this project. I think it's important that people recognize, and I'll say it again, that the contribution to this by the city is the same. It is unchanged. It is a box. It remains the box. The size of the box is the same as it was before. But what's different is that from when Councilman Williams was discussing his interactions with the mayor, is that now we are getting twice the project for the same amount. Originally, we had what I call the first L for our box of money. Now we're getting twice the route for the same amount of money. That is good business. And it's also important to remember that this is part of a transportation plan. The money we're putting forth is not just for Streetcar. It includes Streetcar, but also there is the West Side Multimodal Project, as well as via transportation stops and improvements. It is part of a plan. To call it pure Streetcar is actually doing taxpayers a disservice because it's not true. Finally, let's talk about the business community and their contribution for a quick second. The original L was going to have what was essentially a tax, not on the business community, but property owners, which includes small businesses. When you add the second route, you start getting into other areas that are not the big boys like Ed Cross, but small businesses and residential areas. That's a very different proposition. They were not part of the conversation necessarily of the first part. The county, thankfully, comes up with a tremendous amount of money to add the route, and so our options are what? Tax one group and not the other? Or to all of a sudden start taxing homeowners and small businesses without asking them? What we're saying now is there needs to be a different model where folks like Mr. Cross can contribute because they are benefiting, but it has to be done in a way that's fair to everybody along the entire route. And if we're getting the same project, if we're getting a larger project, twice the project for the same amount of money, without burdening those small businesses and residents, it makes a tremendous amount of sense, leaving open the opportunity for people like Mr. Cross to contribute. We have to take bold steps to move the city forward. We have to improve our downtown. We have to be aggressive in making San Antonio a 21st century town. This is certainly part of it, but we found a way to do it to double the product with the same amount of money. And I don't know how that's a bad thing. So I fully endorse this proposal. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's also important that we talk to people with a significant amount of clarity so we don't muddy the issue. This is not necessarily, nor should it have to be, a political issue. We should disagree without pitting ourselves against one another. This is policy and infrastructure, and it should remain that way, but it's also very exciting. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Bernal. Councilman Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the chance here to speak again. I don't think I don't think we're talking about getting twice for our money, okay? And let's, while we're clarifying and going back over history, when we walked into this, we had hoped, and I thought I had assurances, but I didn't, that we'd let the bus circulator compete with a streetcar. So that we'd have the bus circulator going east and west and see how that works, and we'd have a streetcar going the other way, because again, I think it's through doing that we learn what works. Well, that was obviously passed over, but at the time we did this, it was certainly my understanding that we'd give the bus circulator a chance to see how it worked before we made the additional investment. That ran into some political problems, not in this chamber, but in other places, and people moved forward, and what I believe is pretty much, in some cases, duplicating transportation services. So I'm not sure that it's totally accurate to think about it as we're getting twice for the same amount of money, because it does cost more to build the east-west than what we just envisioned. And it's always hard to make sure we understand a transaction as time goes on. And that's why I guess we're here to talk about this today. And I go back to the fact that, yes, you will have individuals that will pay some more for this. But if the concept behind and I'm not sure I can make the argument for it, but I'm willing to let the experiment go forward under certain conditions. If the argument is you have a streetcar, your property values goes up, you get something. It probably goes up more than the tax you're paying. That's the argument. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't run, clearly in all of these things, you don't know until you do it, which is why I was willing to make the compromise that I certainly did with the mayor a year or so ago on the first step of this. So we have a different issue, we have a different situation, but the reality is the conditions that we first talked about haven't changed. They're the same. They're the same. They're absolutely the same. Unless someone else has something to say, I'd like to move the question, please.
Apparently, Councilman Soul still has something to say.
Thank you, Mayor. Real quickly, I want to kind of lay out a sequence here because I'm confused a little bit. There was tremendous support originally that staff brought to us saying that the business community along those routes were ready, willing, and able to support financially this proposal. Then we hear today that the first plan that we voted on, we no longer need to do that because we found additional funding sources, so we don't need that private investment. But then Councilman Bernal, I think, articulated it better, which is the first plan we voted on was really impossible to implement. It's too cumbersome. There were too many small property owners to be asked to pay. Well, that's what I understood. And what I got out of this is we should have done a better job of creating a program that brought in those private investment dollars long before we voted on it. Because here we are today saying it's unworkable or we don't need it. So the final thing that I'm hearing is a continued willingness of the property owners along these corridors to pay more, that everybody's, they're willing to pay more, that they're willing to pay more for the PID. And so the question is, why don't we formalize that now? If there's a willingness from the property owners and the businesses to invest in this or invest in increasing their PID, before we go forward on this specific, why don't we lock down the details of that? And then I think I'd be more comfortable with this. But I'm not comfortable with, well, let's move forward today, right now, and sometime in the future, if somebody wants to voluntarily write some checks, we'll hope that they do that. If the business community truly wants to invest in this, then let's formalize that arrangement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Councilman Souls. Thanks again for the presentation, Mike. What we'll do is take a vote first on Councilman Williams' motion, and if that fails, then we'll take a vote on the second motion. So we have a motion and a second by Councilman Williams for denial of this ordinance and keeping the original ordinance in place. Please vote. Motion fails. We have a motion by Councilman Lopez for approval of the ordinance on the table today. Please vote. Motion carries. All right.